those misinterpretations of Christian belief, I'm not any longer a Southern Baptist. I resigned from the Southern Baptist Convention in the year 2000 when it was ordained that a woman could no longer be a pastor or a deacon, or if a woman taught in a Baptist seminary, she could not teach a class that had a boy in it. You could find some Bible verses existing. And the same thing happens in Islam. And the same thing happens in Buddhism. The same thing happens in Hinduism. You can find scriptures if you're a male that wants to be in the ascendant that will convince whatever you worship as wanting women to be inferior. And this has horrendous results. And I would hope that some of you would take from this session today determination, or the inclination at least, to correct some of these problems. There were in the Second World War, I was in the Navy in the Second World War, about 40 million people killed. It's the most devastating catastrophe that ever struck the human race, all the way from China and Japan, as you know, across to our country. 40 million. At this moment, there are 4 times that many girls missing from the face of the earth. 160 million. Who have been killed at birth, strangled by their parents, because they prefer boys to girls. And nowadays, with modern sonograms, they don't have to wait till birth. When a fetus can be identified after 12 weeks or so as female, they're born a fetus. Some of this is caused by governments that mandate the size of families. China, I go to China almost every year, and India. My mother served in the Peace Corps in India. In China now, with more than 1 billion people, for every 100 girls, there are 118 boys. Where are the other 18 girls out of every 100? In India, which also has about 1 billion people, for every 100 girls, there are 112 boys. We have problems with slavery. I mentioned slavery earlier. It was horrible during the 18th and 19th centuries. We finally did away with slavery, say about 1860 and 65. We have more slavery now than we ever had in the 18th and 19th century. More people are sold into human bondage across international borders than ever before in history. In Atlanta, Georgia, every month, there are between 200 and 300 people sold into slavery in our city. And the reason for that is that brothels or whorehouses are prevalent in our country. And Atlanta has the busiest airport on earth. And a large portion of our passengers coming in are from the Southern Hemisphere. And they have brown or black skin. And a brothel owner can buy a brown or black skinned girl for about $1,000. From whom they make a profit of about $35,000 a year. And it's not a brothel in America that's not known by the mayor, city council, chief of police, and the policeman on the beat. But in this country, for every brothel owner or pimp, male customer arrested, we arrest 25 girls. About 80% of all the slaves sold in the world today are girls, sold into sexual slavery. The State Department is required by the U.S. Congress now to give a report on human trafficking, they call it. And they estimate that before the last year I've seen, there's 60,000 people living in America now in sexual slavery. Well, the point is we have problems of great magnitude basically are responsible for correcting those problems. As Eddie King, Martin Luther King Jr., and Andy Young, and John Lewis, and many others did in Rosa Parks back in the previous century. Well, I would say it would be other ministers of the gospel, just like Martin Luther King Jr. was. He didn't hesitate to use his pulpit to magnify his voice because he was, in effect, not only speaking for his neighbors who were being persecuted, he was always also speaking for Jesus Christ. There's some progress being made in the Islamic world. The Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, which is a university in Cairo, Egypt, 120,000 students, is a partner with us in trying to convince the Muslims in the world that men and women are the same in the eyes of the Prophet, Allah, Muhammad. So we have a lot of support there. But there's a fairly dormant acceptance of this kind of oppression within this Christian community. We also have a common resort in this country, which is a great country, acceptance of violence. And that's the other aspect. It's a misinterpretation of scriptures, and it's also a resort to violence. Our country has been at war more than any other country on earth. We've been at war with about 30 other nations since the Second World War. We've been in conflict, I think, every year except 4 years. I won't say which we are 4 years ago. The point is, you know, it's not easy for a pastor of a church that has members who watch Fox News to emphasize the fact that we worship the Prince of Peace. And so, peace and justice and equity and human rights, the alleviation of suffering, where should be the focal point for that bubbling and constantly expansive and courageous statement to originate? I'd say it would be among people just like you, who have committed yourselves to a life of religion in some way. I don't know exactly how. But moral values are not hard to understand. And the need for the application of moral values in our own neighborhoods, our own community, our own family, is also not hard to ascertain. I think I'll answer your questions.
Thank you a great deal, Mr. President, for sparkling and inspiring comments. You'll be happy to know that all Candler students are required to memorize those 34,000 verses. I'm joking on that. However, this is a meeting of the class on principles and practices of moral leadership, and this week we're reading your White House diary. I'm holding that up. This is not a commercial, but for those of you who are visiting, it's a terrific account of day-by-day, week-by-week reflections and memories of meetings held and the way in which a moral leader is reflecting on daily events. I'd like to pose the first question, and then we're going to open to the audience. We'll have ushers with the microphone who can move about, and then we'll conclude promptly at 3:30. In 2002, you received the Nobel Peace Prize But something else happened in 2002. On the cover of Time magazine, we talked about this in class last week, the cover of Time magazine's Person of the Year, 3 women were featured on that cover. Go back and take a look at that. 3 representatives of the FBI, Enron, and WorldCom. And the Person of the Year was the whistleblower. And these 3 women were featured. Also, I note that this wonderful quote by Susan Sontag, at the center of the moral life and our moral imagination are the great models of resistance, the great stories of those who have said no. And so we've talked a lot in the semester already about people who resist large systems, the Enrons of the world, governments, denominations. When the individual is in and part of a larger bureaucracy, does he or she have an obligation to become a whistleblower, to speak truth to that power, even if she or he is risking their own well-being? And so that's the first question, how you reflect on advising future pastors, leaders, bishops, nonprofit leaders, educators, on the moral responsibility of the individual conscience when they detect something is going awry in the institution or its values are not properly set.
I understand that.
Yes.
Well, that's a complex question, and I'll try to answer it partially in the opening comments. Just point out that each one of us, when you graduate or when you get a family or when you get settled, when you get a church or an assignment, whatever, will be deprived of a great deal of the freedom that you have now as a student. You'll be bogged down with obligations to your employers or maybe to your spouse or to your families, and then your stability in life will be one of the most important things for you to consider. And to speak out publicly against what your own corporation is doing or what your own church is doing or what your own community is doing is a very difficult personal thing to do. It requires a lot of courage. And all of the whistleblowers that were mentioned here spoke out against something that was going on within their organization, within the FBI or within a major corporation. And as you know, even in recent years, I would say since President Obama came in office, we've had more persecution for whistleblowers in the government than ever before. More people have been arrested than before. And although he promised when he was running for office that it would be a more open society, now the value of secrecy has become a dominant factor in life. So I don't think there's any doubt that that this is always an important thing to do. But when you get into your life commitment on a permanent basis later on, then you have, I think, an opportunity at least, maybe an obligation, to look around you and say, what in my own church, what in my own community can I do to improve the lot of people who are lonely or abandoned or deprived in some way or suffering? And that would require stirring of his current prevailing situation and maybe the aggravation of somebody who has an investment in what's going on now. Or maybe who's very proud of what's going on now and doesn't want to see any criticism of something for which they were responsible before you got there. So I would say that no matter where you are in life, I happen to be 90 years old now, or many of you are in your 20s and so forth, but whenever you are in life, there is always, I think, a religious Christian obligation to try to improve the lot of the lives of the people around you, no matter how much it might be condemned or criticized or resisted by your fellow family members or your fellow Christians in a church or your fellow neighbors in a community. So that's what Jesus did. Jesus was always rocking the boat.